Hello and welcome to this conversation with WSU President Kirk Schulz. I'm Enrique Cerna, WSU Regent, and Kirk and I will be talking about his retirement that's coming up next year, the challenges facing higher education, presidential search, of course, the Pac-12, and other issues that higher education will be facing down the road here. And Kirk, where are you today?
I'm in Richland, Washington on our Tri-Cities campus. So if you could look out to my side, you see the river. And for the Cougs out there that have never been to our Tri-Cities campus, it is located right along the river. It's very picturesque. It's a beautiful walking path right along there. So happen to be here today. I was here part of this week. Then I'm in Vancouver for Thursday and Friday, do commencement there, and then back to Spokane on Monday. So bouncing around the system as always.
Let's talk about your announcement that you are going to retire at the end of June of 2025. This is something actually that has been in discussion with the regents for some time, I think well over a year or more.
Right.
So making that decision, how did that come about for you?
You know, I've often thought that there's a shelf life that leaders have leading particular institutions, organizations, whatever. And I always felt that I wanted to, if at all possible, be able to sort of control as much as I could, when I felt the time was right, and not have everybody sit you down and say, Kirk, you did a great job for the first 2/3 of your time, but man, that last third, things kind of fell off quite a bit. So to me, I always thought probably 10 years of being a president at one place is enough. And for me, at the end of next year, it'll be 9 years leading WSU. But I sort of felt, and I've had a lot of conversations over the last 2 weeks where a lot of people were disappointed that, I wasn't staying a little bit longer. But at the same time, people say, I kind of understand it. And I appreciate the fact that we want to do this in a way that allows the board plenty of time to go recruit the next president, and not me walking in January, February saying, I think this summer I'm done. And then everybody's in scramble mode. I just feel this is the right way to go about doing a transition. Let's take our time. Let's do it right. Let's get that next leader. And then I hope to be able to work with that person some so that we do more than here's the office key type of handoff, but, have some time to work together to help prepare them to be a great president.
So I attended, along with some other regents, a Regents Trustees conference in Boston, and attended a session that dealt with presidential search. One of the things they said was that today, most presidents only last 3, maybe 5 years at the most, because the job has become so tough. So how do you end up making it to 9? Is it because of WSU? Is it you travel a lot? People are complaining a lot, and you're the target a lot. So how do you withstand all that? And I can understand, 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. One, I've always wanted to lead where there's challenges. I mean, I never wanted to be a maintenance president. Just kind of come in and don't rock the boat one way or the other. The good part of that is that a lot of times people think organizations got to evolve and change. The challenge of that is in large organizations, people claim they want to change, but a lot of times they really kind of want, life to look the same tomorrow as it did yesterday. So I think for people who embrace the ability to sort of be in charge of this large, complex organization and relish in the fact that it is large and complex, a presidency really represents a really unique opportunity. On the flip side, one of the challenges is you got people throwing rocks at you literally all the time. For example, you're either not on campus X enough, or you're not at a certain number of events, or how come you only made 5 basketball games, or, you weren't at this concert. You just wind up, that's all part of it. And at some point you say, I'm going to do the best that I can with these types of things. And, as we start the next search, people will say, well, I want a president who's more involved with student things, or more involved with this, or more involved with that. I will tell you, you get to the end of it, and you got a list of 25 things. You say there's no person in the world that can do all this stuff. And so to me, it also represents what are the key things an institution needs at a certain point in time, and what leader can we go in that's going to meet the majority of the things that we think are important, but they're never going to be able to meet them all. So I wanted to be a president when I was an undergraduate, and the fact that I've been able to do it at a land-grant university like Washington State, it helps. The other part of your question, though, Enrique, that I think is really important is that some institutions have this really rapid turnover. They just kind of come in and chew people up and they leave quickly. And others tend to have people to stay a long time. So I'm only the 11th president in nearly 130 years. So people tend to come to Washington State and stay a while. And I think largely people get along. They have high expectations for leaders. They're going to complain. But at the end of the day, I think most people are like, hey, let's kind of bond together and figure out a way to make it go. So I think that puts us in a little more unique position. I had a colleague who reached out this last week and said, Kirk, one of the challenges Washington State has, and this will sound unusual, but I think it's true, is they haven't had a bad president. You go to some other places, they've had somebody after a year, everybody's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what happened, but this is not where we need to be. And they said, over our long-term history, having 11 people in that job, they've never had somebody that people really thought, what a disaster. I mean, there may be individuals that think that, but not collectively as a whole. And I think we've been spoiled a little bit, and I hope we continue to be spoiled, and that, my successor comes in for 10 years and defies those norms. But it's tough out there. It's I got a lot of colleagues at other schools that I think are impressive men and women, and some last 3 years and they're done, and you're just like, wow, I never saw that coming. And Enrique, generally when people get to a presidency, they're like the superstars. They're the ones you're like, hey, they can do anything. And then you watch somebody like that is used to this high level of achievement, not being successful. It's tough to watch.
Yeah, you can see them getting chewed up on the East Coast here over issues of the protests that are going on now and all of that. Fortunately, WSU is not having to deal with that. I got to bring up some of the criticism that's been brought up against you, at you. And that's something that's been going on now for well over a year. You have a small group of Regent scholars and other faculty that have also voiced their discontent. Again, it has to do with how our enrollment has dropped, research issues, budget cuts, which are, totally understandable and something that continue to happen. And again, the finger is pointed at you, and actually has been pointed as well to the Board of Regents as to whether, we're doing our jobs. Chance for you to respond to this, because, that's part of the rock throwing that has been going on.
Well, if you've been somewhere for 30 years and you invested your career in that place, you want to see it be successful. And so I don't fault any of the faculty or former leaders or whatever pointing out, hey, here's some issues that we don't feel are being addressed by current leadership with the rigor or the focus that we feel that need to be there. So look, that's part of higher education. That's part of academia. And I appreciate the fact these are folks that probably could have gone to many other institutions. They said, look, I'm going to stay at Washington State. I'm going to help build it here. So I just want to make that clear. Every institution is going to have some really preeminent senior people that if they're not happy with direction, they're going to speak about it. And guess what? They're going to have some other people that say, well, if that person is saying that, that's got some weight to it. That being said, I think there's also generally better ways to do things than going to the external media and doing that. And I do that. If there was a disappointment piece in any of that, it's, all of us have spent the last 3 months dealing with the fact that some stuff was put out in the newspaper and the media. And I get people said, well, look, we don't feel we were getting the answers we wanted to, so that's what we feel we had to do. That's their choice. If I've talked to alumni, faculty, staff, I hear more often not that people disagreed with the things, but they disagree with sort of the way, people went about it. But that being said, that's today's age. So to me, Enrique, some of the things around, how come our enrollment's not strong? And people look over University of Washington and say, they're just picking the size of their class. They have so many people want to go there. We're an R1 institution. Why not us? Why are we having less faculty? Why with this enrollment drop are we seeing, budget cuts every year at WSU, which really hurts us moving ahead? And look, if I've been there 30 years, I'd be pretty upset with some of that stuff too. However, I think the long run, I will say that the way WSU has solved problems, and I'll go back 20, 30 years, and other people that I've talked to, been here a long time, is you put your head together, you say, here's a plan, let's execute the plan. We may not all agree with all aspects of it, but that's how we're going to do it. And that's a tenet of my leadership. It's not Kirk. It's the team. That includes the regents. That includes other folks. And we develop a plan and go for it. I want the next president to be able to come in there, Enrique, and I would like I believe our enrollment, I think we're going to see the another nice, robust entering class this next fall. I think by fall of 25, our overall enrollment's going up, not just the incoming classes are going up. And I don't want the next president to come in and have that as a burden on their shoulders. So that can be part of Kirk and Kirk's legacy. That's fine. But I think that next person can come in and say, hey, we're building now, man. We hit our low and we're moving back up. And I think those kind of things help with faculty and staff.
Part of the other criticism as well has been at the leadership level, feeling like it's top heavy. And again, salaries there because of the market tend to be pretty high. How do you respond to that? That say, hey, we're paying that much for these folks. Why isn't that happening to the money going to more faculty or what faculty needs or graduate students? And because we're not having enough of those students.
My entire time as either a president at Kansas State or here, that's been a critique. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a single president anywhere that is not a normal faculty and staff critique. Too top heavy, too many vice presidents, vice chancellors, whatever the title is, they're too compensated. At the end of the day, I think the question is, what do all the folks do? And it's really easy to sit there and go, well, I don't know what that person does. They get paid a lot of money. Then you find out they're doing 60-hour weeks because of all this stuff that they're having as part of their responsibilities. And we have a colleague who is currently serving an interim position, and he said somebody was giving him a hassle about, well, now you got this cushy job. And he said, well, you can have my cushy 60-hour a week job anytime you want to. And I do think there's this sense that, I'm out there, visiting with donors and, flying around and not really doing any real work, and not just me, but others. And I think I would urge people, before just saying, oh, those people, we don't need them, maybe have a conversation. Somebody say, well, tell me what it is that you do. And I have found every leader will sit down and say, let me describe exactly what I do, how I impact students and how I impact the institution. And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a convert, but it's stunning to me sometimes how once those conversations take place, people go, I had no idea. But I think we've got to continue to do that. But I also want to be careful that we don't look like we're spending all of our time just justifying who we hire. I mean, if you're not careful, then every communication is like, why we need to hire this. So I get the criticism. I get if I'm rank and file and I look and I used to have X number of faculty teaching widget science, and now I got, 2/3 of X and they're hiring another administrator. You go, boy, this seems like a misplaced set of things. So I think it's a valid conversation topic. And I think I will argue that probably we could have done a better job at justifying those types of things when they occur. On the flip side, we have put out some very clear communications over the last 2 years that would say, hey, this is a retitled position. It's actually, the position's been there for a decade. We're just titling it differently. And I think sometimes people ignore those and go, see, that's a new vice, whatever. And you go, no, that position was there before. We've just changed the title to reflect what they're doing. It's not actually new. It is new, but it was taking place of an old one that wasn't filled. And I think those are the types of things that sometimes people ignore. So, be better, Enrique, always.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think we're still fairly lean administratively for an institution, and that's not I don't want my successor to come in and say, well, I got to double in size, all this stuff. But I also think that we've tried to be really careful with that.
Let's talk about what land-grant universities are facing these days, because it seems like the challenges for land-grant universities like WSU, particularly in these times of challenging enrollment and what our mission is supposed to be about, to give an opportunity for those who maybe have not had that opportunity before. We're feeling it. We're feeling that crunch of the enrollment. And, we're not always in those exotic places close to a major urban center. How do we deal with this in a time where we have these enrollment drops and where we have young people, particularly young men, which I don't really understand, that don't want to go to college?
I still think at the end of the day, we've got to stick with our core values as an institution. And I think if you look back over WSU's history, we've had other enrollment drops where we would just say, well, we're going to open the floodgates and we'll take anybody just to get those numbers up. And that happened prior to my arrival, and it was just kind of a disaster. And a lot of folks said, Kirk, let's not do that again. Let's make sure that we build enrollment in the right way. But I think if our core value is, we're going to really focus on Washington residents and meeting the needs of Washington residents across the entire state, not just along the I-5 corridor, but, in the rural counties and in other areas, Spokane, Tri-Cities, so forth, across the state. I think that probably hurts us a little bit, and hurt us a little bit coming out of COVID, as we saw some of the demographics of people coming to WSU that maybe aren't as wealthy, don't have the same sort of economic tools that some other folks have. And that's the area that we really saw our enrollment drop. But I would argue at the end of the day, we're focused on Washington residents across the state. And what we want to do is continue to build that back. So I think land grants, and I talked to other land grant presidents, a lot of us are doubling down on our core values and saying, this is where we got to be. And we've always taken that if enrollment is down or we're smaller, that is somehow worse. And I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, how big do we want our campuses to be? I mean, it's easy to say, well, we were this size in 2019, so therefore that's the size we ought to be. People forget in 2019, we were scrambling. We took a dorm out of mothballs over the summer just so we had enough beds to get everybody in. You would argue, well, that's great that your enrollment was so high, but that may not have been the educational experience that we want. So to me, where the next president, I think, has that opportunity coming in is working with the campus chancellors and saying, okay, let's pick what is the right enrollment size, what does the faculty and staff and administration need to look like to support that level of students. And I think let's make sure that what we're doing is sustainable and that we're not arguing that growth every year is our success. I think we pick the size of where we need to be, and then you budget and you staff to that particular size.
That's streamlining. In most businesses today, they do what they have to do when the market tells you that,
Right.
you're not making it work. Higher education doesn't work that way. I mean, it kind of reminds me of public television, to be honest with you, that I worked in for a lot of years. That whole idea of kind of a bureaucracy, and we have done it this way for all this time. So how do you change the mindset? Because that's going to bring change, and people are going to go, I don't know.
Yeah, we've got some units that internally in some other areas are moving. And if I just describe to you what they did, they're very student facing. They have terrific people in them doing great things for our students. But you would say they ought to both be kind of in the same place. And I don't even mean the same building, but there's duplication of effort and all that stuff. When you go through those things, I'm getting complaint emails. Well, we haven't done it this way for 20 years. Why do we have to look at something different? And so I think, and you just and you take a beating every time you do that stuff, and not just me, I mean, the leadership team. And so I think it's how do we elicit change? And everybody from the outside always goes, you got to change quicker. You got to be more nimble. You got to do this. You got to do that. Internally, I don't care how much you communicate, how many meetings you have, how much justification you put together for something. There's going to be a group of people that go, this is just a bad idea. And I think as we look at higher ed and public higher education over the next decade, there's going to require more change, not less. And I think it's going to require, leaders with thicker skin. And there's just going to be a little bit of angst, and you're going to have some morale issues at a lot of places, because significant change unless it's all everybody, gets paid more and they got more money to work on. I mean, that's always wonderful and that can happen. But I think there's going to be this constant sense of we got to keep doing things differently every single year. And that wears on people after a while that aren't used to that.
Here's a big issue that we have heard a lot as part of the Board of Regents doing these. We talked to faculty, done some listening sessions, and that is pay. And everybody complains about that, and valid, no doubt. I guess the big question comes is, how do we get our state legislature to look at higher education differently? And when it comes to the pay issue, public education, it's mandated because of the Constitution, not us. So how do we change that? What's the challenge there?
Yeah, I wish I had a pat answer for this, but if we look at what other people in the state have done, there's a couple interesting things. Right now, one of the challenges we have is that, and this goes back to the Great Recession, is that the state prior to the Great Recession, if they did a 4% raise, actually provided us 4%, the entire amount of money. They went to a fund split that was, we'll provide about half of it, and you guys have to provide the other half out of your own budget somehow. And, at the time, everybody was so desperate, you're like, okay, we'll take it. Well, that turns out that's really been problematic for the public research institutions in the state and so on, because we never get the dollars that we need. And you said, well, if you're really going to make adjustments, say you got 3 or 4% from the state, if you're doing your budget well, maybe you can internally then add another couple percentage to that. So what you wind up doing is, instead of just trying to match what the state's giving you to get up to the number they announce, you're actually able to maybe do some other types of things to get that. The community college system a year ago decided that they were going to have no other requests for the legislature than for the state to pay 100% of the salaries. And so that is a option, is to go to the legislature and say, we're not going to ask for any new programs, anything. The only thing we're going to ask for is to fully fund our salaries. And you say, well, Kirk, if that worked for somebody else, why don't you all do it? You're literally sliding all your chips into the center of the table. And if it doesn't work, then all of a sudden everybody goes, okay, we walked away, we didn't get the salary, and we got nothing else, because what a stupid decision. On the other hand, if it works, everybody goes, well, finally, we got the state to kind of step it up and pay our salaries fully. That gives the university some more flexibility down the road to continue to do things. That's one. And we've talked about that. I don't want anybody listening to this going, well, it sounds like they've already eliminated that. I think that's a real challenge, is, do we do that?
That's rolling the dice big time.
And to be honest, it's us and the University of Washington got to both decide to do that. It can't be us doing that and University of Washington saying, well, we got a different set of priorities. Your two research institutions have to say, this is what we're going to do. And I'm not sure at the end of the day, Enrique, when I look at some of the programs and other initiatives that come up from our faculty and staff and things that meet needs of the state, you're knocking off some pretty important things that I think other groups of folks internally and externally would say, no, instead of just salaries, you all need to have a degree in supply chain management or whatever it is if you're going to be the state's land-grant university. That's one. The second thing, again, really controversial, is what you have to do is you have to just start saying, okay, for maybe some high-demand fields, we're going to allow salary increases that are significantly above what everybody else is going to get. And you do that, you take care of some of it, and then you got other people going, well, obviously I don't matter. because I only got 3% and these other people got 8%. My cost of living is expensive too. And I don't know a single university that's really done these selective raises around certain areas that has worked on a large scale. But if you're looking for solutions, that's one of the other things is you just recognize that faculty and staff in different fields are going to be compensated maybe very differently. And that is a stance that you take. But I'll tell you what, every state agency I'm aware of, not just higher ed, has got the same issues. You go and talk to somebody in the forest area or, anybody who's a state employee, they all say my salary increases have not come close to keeping pace with inflation. And to be honest, we got lucky for many years where people would be unhappy with what they were making, but inflation was, 1% to 2%. We were able to sort of meet that. When you saw a skyrocketing inflation, people's purchasing power really degraded very quickly. And I think we're still feeling the aftermath of that.
Right. There's, I don't know when, other than just trying to, if you roll the dice or not. All right, let's talk about college athletics. Okay, we had the Pac-12 implosion. I actually think if you look at things right now, we've actually come out pretty well. It's been a journey. I like to say to my Husky friends that give me a hard time about the Apple Cup that, hey, yeah, but we beat you in court. We and OSU. So I hear from a lot of people, okay, well, we got all this money now from the Pac-12, the settlement and that. But it really doesn't work that way. Can you explain as clear as you can where we're at, and I guess from a money standpoint and where it leads us now, particularly with athletics, which are also going through budget cuts?
I'll try and do my best. So as folks know that we have a bunch of money that we got from the settlement with the departing 10 schools. We have money coming from the Rose Bowl and these other places that had multi-year contracts that were with the Pac-12 conference. And there wasn't really ways for people necessarily to get out of those basketball units. You roll it all together, and over a multiple year period, we've got tens of millions of dollars coming in. And so you have this, people have used the term war chest, and, you've got all this there. Well, guess what? You've got 3 things you got to really fund out of all that. One is just conference operations. And you say, well, it's only 2 schools, but there's certain things you still got to do. So the conference office is probably going to go from nearly 200 employees down to 20. So if we think that we're seeing these significant revenue reductions on the campuses with athletics, nothing like people who've been with the Pac-12 for 30 years and all of a sudden, because of some schools, found themselves literally out of a job. So we've got that. Then the 2 universities also didn't want to do stair-step our athletics budgets down. If you're used to getting 30-some million or $35 million a year from the conference, and all of a sudden that goes to 0, we were like, okay, we need to find a way to bridge that gap. So you got to use some of that money coming in to help with those particular things. And we want some stability over the next couple of years so that you don't sort of say, well, we got through 12 months, we've spent our savings account, ran it down to 0, and now we got a real issue. So what we want to do is say for the next 2 years, we want a good, stable income coming in Oregon State and Washington State to allow us to sort of determine what that next step is going to be. So that's kind of where we are. And it's easy for everybody to add it up and say, well, just go buy a bunch of schools, and at the end of the day, if somebody says, well, should we go buy school X that I think would be a great addition, or do we just gut Cougar athletics down to the bone so that we don't have anything? We say, hey, look, we spent that money to buy a bunch of schools. I think most people come back and say, Kirk, that was really a stupid decision. Why didn't we keep and maintain some excellence in Cougar athletics or Beaver athletics? And then let's see what the landscape does and how we can decide either to do a merger, add other schools, keep that Pac-12 brand, whatever. So I think we spent that first 6 months, I'd like to tell everybody, in legal battles. We spent the last 6 months or so, I know we're just in May, through let's get our commissioners set, let's get our budget set, And now what we've shifted into is a sort of overdrive over the next 3 to 4 months to say, okay, January 1 of 25, we probably got to have a pretty good idea of what our long-term solution for WSU and Cougar Athletics is going to look like. That can look like a long time. To me, it feels really short. And I think we've got some stability for a couple of years. We've come out of this better than I thought we would, certainly in August when the schools were departing. But at the same time, what we really did is bought ourselves a couple of years of some stability, and we need to utilize that effectively. So I know that's a long explanation, but it came down to, we just felt, let's use those conference revenues to enhance our two institutions that are currently there, as opposed to going on a shopping spree that people later on would say that probably was ill-advised.
Yeah, we have some flexibility here, actually, because don't we, as we look at the landscape, which is constantly changing, and let's face it, realignment is continual. It might give us an opportunity to say we could go here, or we could rebuild the Pac-12. So in a way, it's a fluid, but yet we're in a wait and see situation. So that is not a bad thing, I think. I want to ask you about Ann McCoy, who stepped in as the interim athletic director. Is she going to be a candidate for the full-time job?
Well, I certainly hope so. When I talked to Ann about serving as her interim, I said, this is not to preclude you from being considered for the full-time job. And, it's interesting. Ann was like, hey, that is not a primary concern with me right now. What I want to do is get in there, roll up our sleeves, work with our coaches, our student athletes, and make sure that we have a great work environment, going forward. And, when you're offering somebody an opportunity, and that's the kind of response you get back, you say, boy, this was definitely the right phone call to make. So at no point is Ann pressed on any of that kind of stuff, but she's done an impressive job in the last 4 weeks. I think when I visited with her this last week, she mentioned she was now 4 weeks into it, hired a men's basketball coach, got a conference affiliation agreement done for baseball and swimming, extended Cammie Etheridge as our women's basketball coach. I had one head coach tell me, he goes, hey, Kirk, I've learned more this was after she'd been there about a week, in the last week about what's happening than I knew in the last 2 years. And so, again, I'm not disparaging any leaders or anybody who's been there, but I think internally I've had a lot of people walk up to me and say, Ann is the right person at the right time to be leading us. So I've been really thrilled and impressed with her. But, one of the things I talked about with her this week is I said, and, a bunch of people have met you a little bit, but we just need you out, and we need you just visiting with Cougs. And she said, I'm ready, and I'm doing it already. And but I think Cougs should expect to see her at more events, and she's approachable. She's warm, been with us for 20 years, really just wants to see WSU be successful. And I've just been thrilled at the job she's done.
Oh, by the way, I want to talk to her too. So hopefully we'll do something together. I think one of the things is that I was impressed with her is that she's just about held every job in the athletic department. So it says a lot. Athletics in general here, though, it is still Wild West out there and with no insight. And it seems like the bigger schools are getting richer and the ones that aren't are not so much.
Yeah, it has gone crazy. If I look back at where we were 2 years ago, you didn't have anybody can transfer kind of at any time. We can pay players directly, all those types of things that now are just part of the landscape. At the end of every season now, we're all not worried about next year. We're like, how many people are going to enter the portal? I mean, that has now just become part of it. Enrique, at the end of the day, I think WSU has got to have the conversations with the board, with our donors, with our student athletes and others to say, what's important to us and where do we want to be? And I say, where do we want to be? I don't mean which conference, but I just think that we can map our own pathway. And it's not going to look exactly like we did before, but I want to be a little bit careful about chasing the bright and shiny object. Well, do we want to be in this conference? Do we want to do this? We need to be like UW, or we need to be like this. I just think we've always kind of punched above our weight. We've always given young folks a great opportunity to come and compete at an elite level, often that were sort of ignored by other schools. There's just those parts of it that I think kind of continue to be part of Cougar athletics. I don't want to lose sight of that. Do we have to have an active NIL pool that is, well managed, well led, well done? Absolutely. That's part of intercollegiate athletics at the highest level. But we're probably never going to be in a position that we're going to go out and have the same kind of pool that Ohio State's going to have, or Michigan or Alabama. And I'm not sure we need to. We're always going to recruit a little different kid, a little bit different style. And but at the same time, I think, we want to be in the game. So I'm very much, let's map our own pathway. Let's not let others dictate where we're going to go. And that can feel uncomfortable to people. They're like, man, we've always competed at the highest level, went to the Rose Bowl, went to the Sweet 16 in basketball, whatever, you pick those things out. It's not that we don't want to do that, but what I do think is we have to look at the future and say, where's our role in it? What's institutionally going to feel good? Where our donors are, and more importantly, our student athletes want to be. And I think that's got to be our guiding star.
Having you just say that, people are going to interpret, oh, Kirk's saying, oh, maybe we should be in the Mountain West. And true. I mean,
oh, yeah. Anytime you don't say, well, we want to compete with this school or that school, or we're going to have as much money as they have, somebody says, well, there must be, he's sending a subtle message here. I want to make it clear, I'm not sending any message, and we want the best place conference-wise for Cougar athletics moving forward that's going to make the most sense to us. One of the things, though, that I really feel is an important core value as me as president, right, is I love the West Coast, and I want our athletes to compete on the West Coast. People can say, well, Kirk, if you got an invitation to be at a conference that was spanning, East to West Coast, wouldn't you take it overnight? At the end of the day, to be honest, probably the answer is yes, but I'm not sure I'd sleep well, because I really do get concerned about the impact on student athletes, on sending them from West Coast to East Coast and expecting them to get a degree and expecting to compete at an elite level. And at some point you say, is that incremental money worth it to do that? And so to me, I just want us to weigh all those things. At the end of the day, if the Big Ten called tomorrow, would we take it? I'm pretty damn sure the answer would be yes. But at the same time, I just want us to be thoughtful and careful about what we wish for, and that we don't put ourselves in a position where we don't have the budget to compete the way we want to, and we put ourselves at a real disadvantage. Everybody goes, well, maybe we should have been a little smarter.
Okay, let's talk about this friction over academics and faculty and collegiate athletics, which is an ongoing thing. Because we hear it all the time. Athletics, why do they get so much? Why, their budget is so big, and why are they being favored in all these things? They don't get hit the way we do as faculty and others.
It was interesting you mentioned that. And so it was maybe 4 years ago, and I'd had a really just bad deal with faculty around the athletics budget, and just, kind of gotten beat up. And I was sitting in my office, and there was a book there that was written by Glenn Terrell, who was president,
during my years there,
yeah,
which is a long time ago.
I happened to open the book up, and there's a picture there, and he was talking about intercollegiate athletics. And near the end of his tenure, he had a no confidence vote by the faculty based on he was overspending for intercollegiate athletics and had taken money from the College of Engineering and given it to Cougar athletics. And what was interesting was everybody tends to think, well, Kirk's been here and he did that, or Elson was here and he did that. This has been a dynamic tension at Washington State University for at least the last 5 presidents, and it will be for the next 5. And everywhere I go, people look and they think athletics gets a free pass. They can spend as much money as they want to. We don't need to be competing at this elite level. Then you go out and speak to alumni and other people who are like, hey, that's our brand recognition. Academics is important, but, people see around the country and they know about the institution, sometimes largely because of football, basketball, and those kind of things. So you talk to 2 different groups that'll be equally as polarized over the importance of it. And that's where a president has got to go down the middle and you gotta make sure that we're communicating with our faculty about the importance of it, knowing that not everybody's going to buy into that. You got to tell people we got to be a little bit careful to balance out what we do at WSU and make sure it fits us. And there'll be some alumni that are like, man, you need to be all in on this kind of stuff. Forget worrying, why do you even worry about balancing the athletics budget, Kirk? Every dollar we spend there is a good one. So you hear both these things as a president, and that I just think I've watched presidents in the modern era, and I'll put that the last decade, go into institutions and say, oh, well, we're just not going to worry about athletics very much. And you want to talk about a way to have a short tenure. That is one way to do it. So you gotta embrace it, but know you're going to get hit from both sides. And I think you got to walk that fine line, down the middle.
Yeah. And let's all remember, too, that I think when the Pac-12 imploded, people wanted us to fight to, keep the Pac-12 and to argue our position because they still wanted us in the game. And we did. And I think we came out better for it.
As of this month now, I've sort of finished 7 years at Kansas State as president, 8 years at WSU, so 15 years. This is something I won't miss, is that constant, battle between the two sides over that. I told Noel, my wife, that one of the things I'm looking forward to on that last day when I'm president and, hand off the office key and whoever is next, takes over. I want to become a fan again of intercollegiate athletics and not think about, well, we're winning. Are we going to be able to keep the coach? How are we going to make our budget work? Oh boy, the attendance seems low. That's going to screw up. But, in a way, you do it for so long. That's the stuff you start thinking about, and not what impact is this having on, young people and their ability to go to school. And I think it's easy to get a little jaded after a while at some parts of this. So
when I came onto the board in March of 2020, COVID. Not long after that, we had a football coach who decided he didn't want to get vaccinated. Not long after that, we dealt with enrollment issues. Then the implosion of the Pac-12. It's like the hits keep coming. I bring that up because I'm kind of wondering, for you, who's been there in this position longer than I've been on the Board of Regents, was there ever a time that you thought, man, I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, there's been a couple times when I've just sort of, ready to say, I'm done, peace out. But so, and at the end of the day, though, I feel that you have this important responsibility as a leader. And look, all leaders have down times where you're not feeling good either about yourself or decisions or, what you're doing. But at the end of the day, there's 7,500 people that are counting on you to show up every day and give your best and do your damnedest to do a really good job. Now, they're not always going to agree with you, but that's the thing that keeps me coming back, is going, this isn't just about me. There's an awful lot of people that want to see the president lead and be successful and help us to do great things. And, but, at some point you sort of, after so many years, you have these accumulated burdens. You made a bunch of decisions. You've got some people that were with you when you started, and then over an 8 or 9 or 10 year period, they're like, well, he started so well, but, I didn't like this, and this. That's just the nature of leadership and being an organization. So, but certainly I've had some low evenings or weekends where I was just like, not sure this is I'm the right person at the right time. But I think, in some reflection, talking to my spouse, talking to my kids, talking to work colleagues and others, it allows you to sort of center yourself just a bit. But I've also had some colleagues that have centered themselves so much that they do it too long. And then at the end, everybody's like, boy, that went too long, and we really needed new voices in there. So yeah, it's how do you balance those two things? And hopefully 10 years from now, people say, well, Kirk got that timing about right.
Is there anything in particular you could share with me? I mean, I'm one of these nosy former journalist guys. When you bring up that, oh yeah, there were a couple of things that really made me want to go.
I think about a year ago, when I got a phone call that said, hey, we're running an athletics deficit. And I was like, oh, okay, $1 million or $2 million. And they're like, oh no, it's $9 or $10 million. And I was like, we just started to sort of get ourselves back in a decent place with the faculty and others, that we were actually going to close the budget. And that may be the most difficult communication I've had to do to our campus community the last 5 years, because I just felt like a failure. I was like, I've been out there telling everybody we're doing our job, we're getting this centered, all that. And then to go, yeah, we missed, and people go, okay, well, I might be able to give you a little bit of a miss. And then you go, oh no, it's a huge miss. It just, that was one, I just thought this may spell, the end. I think the other time is certainly, like many leaders during COVID, you just didn't feel like no matter what you did, you could do it right. You had poor data and information. Afterwards, everybody looked back and say, well, you should have done this or that. But in the middle of that time, we just had sparse data, lots of opinions, lots of strong opinions on everybody. And I've never seen a public health issue become so politicized as a Democratic or Republican thing. If you asked me 10 years ago, would you think if we had a health crisis nationally, it would have been, seen as, if you get a shot, you're this political persuasion or not? I never would have thought that was the case, but that was also a time where I just thought, man, hard to figure that out. So.
Yeah, and public health people became targets and things like that. And I think we need to realize that the chances of a pandemic again are there.
Yes.
Not to say that it won't happen. It very well could. All right. In the remaining time we have here, let's talk about, your last year here and what you hope to accomplish and what's on that list of what you want to get done.
I would say that, the primary thing I want to emphasize this is helping to prepare the next president to be successful. I mean, and by that, there's some things I want to focus on to be able to help that. But every decision I now make, from the retirement announcement to sort of handing it off, what am I doing to help that person to be successful? And so that sort of means we just fortunately hired a fantastic new provost. People are really excited by him. That's the last permanent decision in terms of a national search hire that I will make as president. From here on out, with the exception of the athletic director, we will able to be interim appointments, because I want the next person to be able to come in and, kind of build their leadership team. So to me, enrollment stabilization is really important. And are we providing the resources needed for Saichi Oba and our enrollment management team to continue to build student enrollment across all of our campuses? So that enrollment stabilization is really critical. The second thing is, we just announced an endowed deanship this last week, the Phyllis Campbell endowed deanship, only the second endowed deanship on the West Coast of a woman of color. Phyllis has been just a great example for WSU, but those types of major gifts, the president is always involved with sitting down with a donor and saying, this is really important, and here's why, and here's the case why we think this level of investment is needed. So I want to make sure, secondly, that we're out there continuing to keep that momentum going with those major gifts to WSU. I think we also, Cougar Athletics, we spent a lot of time talking about that. I do not want the new person to come in and say, well, we got 3 options here. Welcome to WSU. You got to make this really, this tough decision right here that's going to have some people unhappy. What I want to be able to do is hopefully have a great landing spot or a pathway or whatever that's going to look like. So the next person comes in and goes, okay, I got to make sure that we're hiring the right coaches and we're doing all that kind of stuff. But guess what? We got a pretty good idea of what we're going to be doing for the next 5 years or so. And then I think the fourth thing that we've talked a little bit about is going out there and doing an internal review of processes, administrative structure, and things like that. These take a couple years. This is not a 3-month kind of deal. But what I want to do is be in a position where that new person comes in and says, look, the leadership team has put together a set of recommendations on things that we may need to look at differently, positions maybe we don't need to have administratively, ways to optimize the programs we offer to meet our student needs. And that's going to take a lot of time, effort, and energy. But again, that's not my decision to make. I just want to tee it up so that person has the tools they needed to be really successful. So there's a lot on the plate. It's not like I'm going to be taking evenings off, but at the end of the day, you want that next person to come in and say, boy, this is that runway's clear. I'm ready to go. And I appreciate the job that Kirk did, making sure I could be successful as 12th president.
So, in retirement, is there one thing in particular that you have looked forward to get the opportunity to do?
I want to do some writing. I want to write a book. And I want to write a book that can be helpful to new leaders and public higher education. And I don't want to write, Kirk's memoirs, here's how I handle this situation really well. I've got some ideas about, shorter letter style formats between, a person that is a senior leader and a junior person who says, hey, I want to be a president or chancellor or dean or whatever. And so I'd like to do some higher education writing that's got a little bit of humor. I don't mean a joke book, but a little bit of humor in it, a little bit lighter touch, but something that's also useful to the times and useful to that next generation of leaders coming up. So I want to do that. I also am a big believer in mentoring, and sometimes people need somebody to call and say, Kirk, I don't know what in the hell to do here. And not for me to say, here's what you got to do, but help them go through a decision-making thing and some thinking time. You just react so quickly. You think you got to make decisions with very limited data. Looking forward to really doing that. And then the final thing is, man, I love this place. Noel and I have given 8 years of blood, sweat, and tears to help us be successful. I want to continue to see it. I want the next president to far exceed anything I've been able to do. And I think I just want to see WSU be successful, and I'm hopeful that I can be some part of that in some form or format.
One last question. I know that your son, Andrew, he aspires to be, or at least he said he aspires to be a university president. After seeing everything you've gone through, would you still recommend it to him?
Absolutely. And interestingly, it's only going to appeal to certain people. And what I think is interesting about that is, guess what? Your children or people that are really close to you, they know the ins and outs of what you really do, not just the glory parts of it or standing up in front of a crowd. And the fact that somebody says, I still think I'd like to try and do that, says they see it as a challenge. And, maybe they never reach it. Who knows? But I want more people out there. I want men and women of color. I want folks from very different backgrounds to say, you know what? I want that opportunity to step in and lead in a complex environment. And if you love education, you love higher education, you love the ability to be seen as a real leader in a state, this is an ideal job for them. And I want to help people get there.
All right. I want that too. Kirk Schulz, thank you so much for your time. Go Cougs, vamos Cougs.
Go Cougs. Thanks.